All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. Once again, we all live on the internet because the pandemic is not quite over yet. But one of the things I like about doing this podcast over the past 8.5 years is that I get to meet a lot of people whose music is fairly new to me. Like I try to go online and find every local artist, regardless of genre, and just start following them on whatever social media, and to find out what they're about, and to find out, to find artists whose music I enjoy. And over the past, I think as listeners to the show might know, over the past few years, I've gotten a lot more into jazz than I ever was before. And Winnipeg is a very rich history and current crop of jazz musicians. So I've been having a few more from that genre on the show, which is a nice mix, between like metal bands and folk singers and stuff. So the guest on this show is someone whose music is relatively new to me, but I've been listening to it. I have a lot of questions for you, but I think the best way to sort of kick this off is if you want to introduce yourself and maybe just give a bit of background on where you come from musically.
Sure. Well, my name is Candice Tugby. I'm a trumpeter, pianist, singer, guitarist, composer, arranger, and educator based in Winnipeg. I was born and raised in Winnipeg, so that's my roots. That's where I'm from. And
cool.
My mom is from Trinidad and Tobago, so I still have a little bit of, that as well.
Sure. Well, one of the things that, like what you just mentioned, is you're kind of not just one instrument. I mean, I noticed that from watching your videos and listening to some of your stuff too. At first, I thought you were a trumpet player because first kind of interaction with your social media, and then it's like, oh no, wait, it's not just trumpet. There's piano and there's vocals and there's guitar. I guess where does that sort of multi-instrumentalism come from? Did you have one instrument that was sort of always your main focus, or have you always been sort of able to play around with all these different sounds?
Well, I was, of course, like every kid, I was singing when I was little, I used to sing on the bus. I probably drove people insane, but that's where I started. And I started taking piano lessons when I was, I think, 6 or 7, classically trained. And I stuck with that till I went to university. So I did that for good 11, 12 years, did my RCM exams. So that was something that was always very much there. When I was in grade 6, I guess I started playing trumpet in band, and it's a hard instrument to play.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
And I did that, but I played a lot of piano. In fact, I was homeschooled. I guess I should mention that. So in grade 6, I joined the grade 6 band and the jazz band. And then in grade 7, my band teacher had moved to the high school and said, hey, I need a piano player for the grade 10 band. Can you come and play with them? Because we have nobody. Right. And of course, being homeschooled, I actually could do that. So that was really fun. And that was a really good opportunity for me to play some more complicated jazz music.
For sure.
And be put in a situation where I had to push myself and kind of learn on the spot. So I continued playing trumpet for throughout middle school and high school. And in grade 12, I went back to the high school to play in the jazz band.
Okay.
And that's where I first really met Derek Gardner, my trumpet prof from the U of M. I'd seen him in passing at events and things like that, but we never really talked. But he came and did a master class for us. And afterwards I said, I'd really like to take some trumpet lessons with you, because I had not taken trumpet lessons up to that point. I was just
really? Okay.
Self-taught. So
it seems like a hard one to self-teach. I mean, like, a lot of people self-teach guitar or bass or something like that, because you can play a few chords and you got a song. But I mean, trumpet, that's a bit of an unusual one to do to learn on your own.
Definitely. I mean, obviously I learned in band and things like that, but to say take private lessons, I hadn't done that yet. So, Derek is just the sweetest guy, and he's like, yeah, come on down, we'll do a lesson. And I went there and I said, I'll pay you. He says, no. Yeah, I'm going to give you a free lesson. I'm like, okay, awesome. Good. So I expect like an hour, half an hour, an hour. 3 hours later, we're still sitting there and we're playing and we're listening to music. And, that just really inspired me at that point, because I loved jazz. I didn't know how to improvise. That was a big thing for me. Well, I understood.
I have a question about that actually. Just sorry to interrupt,
Sure.
but I feel like a lot of people that I know personally as well, who are very classically trained, especially with piano, they can play anything off a given piece of music. They'll play it beautifully, note for note, exactly how it's written. But I know a lot of people who can't then do something like improvise or write a song even, because there's like a
Mhm.
weird. It almost seems like a different part of the brain being
It
used
is.
to improvise than it is to just play something that's already there. So how did you sort of move from one to the other? Because it does seem like two different worlds.
It is. And I'll definitely, that's a very valid point. Like classically trained musicians are, and I have so much respect for them.
Totally, yeah.
They play, I remember sitting on the fourth floor of the music building by the practice rooms, and there would be somebody on a French horn, and they would literally play 2 bars and stop and play it again. And they would do this for hours.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, the the mental uh, the mental space you have to be in to just repeat something to get it consistent every time, is something very, very special. That being said, as you said as well, it's very hard to improvise, because your brain's like, I need something in front of me.
Totally.
You can't. So that was really hard for me. And I had listened to a lot of the music. Like I knew what it sounded like, but I didn't understand the theory and the harmony that was involved for me to make a successful solo.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I owe so much to Derek. He gave me lessons every week. We'd do 2-3 hours every week, and we'd do listening. He'd, quiz me on my theory. He'd help me maneuver changes. And so the first year I auditioned to the U of M, I didn't get in.
Okay.
They only accept like 2 or 3 trumpet players a year. I think there were like 8 or 9 the year that I auditioned. And honestly, I didn't deserve to be there. Like I wasn't there yet, but it was something that I wanted to do. And I said, I want to be in music, but I don't want to play classical music
Yeah.
anymore. Not as a career anyway. I still do play, but not to that extent and that intensity. So I did my interview and I told them because they do a panel afterwards and they kind of talk to you, find out about you and who
Yeah.
you are. And I said, if you don't accept me this year, you're going to see me next year, I told them. And sure enough, I didn't make it the first year, and I took another year of lessons with Derek. I did some U1 classes, because my mind was set on that. And
Yeah.
the second year I did my audition and I did get in.
Nice.
But I did tell them, I said, if you don't accept me this year, you're going to see me next year. You're going to get sick of me. You're going to have to take me eventually.
Eventually, yeah, yeah. That's awesome.
And so hopefully that drive was also visible to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just the first time I really listened to big band music. That's where I started listening to jazz. I was like, this is like whole other level of energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that just kind of pushed me. I was like, this is what I want to do. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but this is what I need to do. And
do you think that Derek saw that in you, that you were obviously like had that desire to be able to do that, however it would end up happening?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because I mean, I was obviously listening to the music. I wasn't just somebody who's like, yeah, I want to do this jazz degree. And
yeah.
I was like, no, I really, really want to do this. And I just don't know how. Like being in a classical world, everything's given to you on a sheet. And I got to say, my sight reading skills are pretty good because of it, especially on piano. Because when you do those exams, like you get massive sight reading pieces to do. So you train to do that. But yeah, that whole concept of improvisation, I didn't know how. I just did not comprehend how people were able to make a solo.
How long did it take to get into that mindset, to be able to actually successfully do that?
Oh boy. I don't think that I really started making solos that I would say I'm even slightly proud of till maybe my 3rd or 4th year of university. Like,
okay.
I worked really, really hard, but I just I always had this kind of mental block up there. It was I had to start realizing if you make a mistake, it's not a mistake. Figure out how to get out of it. It's never a mistake. And that's something I do with my students. Even if they're doing classically trained, I make them improvise from day one.
Cool.
I'm like, no, you need to understand this concept, because if they get stuck in that box, the musicality gets lost.
Well, you probably lose a lot of kids who would have potentially been great musicians too if they just get kind of fed up with it because you get stuck with something that's pre-written, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, even some of my older students, I had a student who was in her 60s.
Okay.
And I said, you're going to learn to improvise. And she just looked at me like, ugh. And I said, you know what? You're doing this for 2 minutes. You don't have to like it, but we're going to do it. And we did it. And a couple weeks passed and I didn't press her because she was like really kind of tense about it. And a couple weeks later, she comes to the lesson. She's like, can we try improvising again? So then she was like, wait, I can actually, do something with this and create something. And that's the one thing that I just love about jazz, is that there's so much spontaneity. It's not scripted like an orchestra. You never know what's going to happen next, and you have to try anyway to respond to what's happening around you. And that's exciting. It keeps you on your toes. You're not just sitting there counting, oh, I've got 64 bars of rest till my one note, You have to be paying attention, even if you're not soloing or playing, because maybe you have to do backgrounds. Maybe, somebody starts playing backgrounds, you got to join in. So you can't check out for a minute. And
well, it's exciting to listen to, I think, for the same reason, because you, as a listener, you don't know what's going to happen either. Literally anything could happen within a single song, let alone a full performance.
Exactly. Yeah.
What I mean, I know we've obviously established that you play jazz and you love jazz, but jazz is such a large umbrella genre. There's so many. I mean, you can take two different jazz records, even from the same year, and they can be so drastically different. What particular type of jazz appealed to you the most when you first got into it?
So I'll tell you a brief story about how I started listening to big band music. That's what I listened to first. My parents didn't really play a lot of music around the house. There wasn't really like something that I was constantly listening to. It was just like whatever's on the radio, whatever's on TV, whatever.
Which is usually not jazz.
Exactly. So I remember I was 15 years old. It was New Year's Day, and I always loved watching the ball drop on TV. And I was watching on CNN. And, every 30 seconds, there's a commercial break. So that particular year, Delta Airlines was playing Frank Sinatra's Come Fly With Me.
Okay. Yeah. It makes a good fit. Yeah.
Every commercial break, I was hearing this little 20-second excerpt of the song. And I was like, I liked it, but I wasn't like, oh, I got to listen to this track right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Ciroc Ultra Premium Vodka, I think they were playing Luck Be a Lady.
Okay.
Another Sinatra arrangement.
Yeah.
And so all night I'm just getting fed this subconsciously, because it's the break. I'm not watching TV at this point. And of course the ball drops and they play New York, New York. And I go to bed. And the next day I wake up and that song's stuck in my head. Come fly with me. So I was like, okay, let me listen to this whole song, because I heard 10 seconds of this. This isn't fair. And I listened to it, and I kid you not, I probably listened to it for an hour on loop. And I'd never heard big band music like that before. It's not Lawrence Welk that you see on TV,
Right.
It's this really big, and I mean, it's a Nelson Riddle arrangement, and it's just the sound and the energy that was coming from that, even though there's I don't even think there's any improvising in that arrangement.
Probably not, no.
But I loved that sound, and I was I listened to it for an hour, and then I thought, okay, well, I'll download, Luck Be a Lady, because I heard this one last night too, right? And I probably listened to that for an hour. And then I was like, okay, well, I like Frank Sinatra. Let me download. So I started downloading albums. And I used to listen to them while I did my schoolwork, because I was homeschooled, right? So
makes sense, yeah.
I would put it on and I would listen to it. I'd put one album on and I'd listen to it for the whole day. Okay. And subconsciously I was taking in all this, this information.
Absorbing it, yeah.
I love this. And then, I started looking, okay, well, who else did Frank Sinatra play with? So then I started listening to Tommy Dorsey and the stuff he did when he was younger. And then from there, I just kind of, okay, well, I'm listening to Tommy Dorsey now. And then, oh, this person performed with Tommy Dorsey. Let me go check what they did. And it just spiraled out of control at that point. And I was just like, oh, this person played on this record. And, I love how, as big as the jazz world was, especially back then, the fact that they're all somehow connected is just incredibly fascinating to me.
Well,
such a small world.
I like that you're doing it that way too, because I feel like we're in an era now where that almost doesn't happen as much as it used to, because everyone just has everything kind of on shuffle, and it's just background noise, and the attention spans are so short. But that's, I mean, that's the same way I always discovered music that I like too. I would look at the liner notes of a record, and it would be someone whose name I didn't recognize, and they were playing on a track I liked. It's like, okay, I'm gonna figure out how to find out who this guy is, and then you find their band and so on. So yeah, it's definitely, I think, the coolest way to discover music, because you already have that in, right? You have the in from
Mhm.
the thing you already love, and then you realize, wait, it's not just Frank Sinatra doing all the music. There's all these other musicians who are involved, and
Exactly.
yeah, that's really cool. So at what point did you sort of realize that this is something you could take further than just being a student and just being someone who was, studying trumpet and doing it at that level?
So you mean like from university
Yeah,
to?
like as an actual musician, I mean, like,
Yeah.
because a lot of people go to university for whatever they're going to, and they often don't end up pursuing that as a career for whatever reason, right? And I mean, music is no different than philosophy or whatever else, right? I mean, people study it, they like it, they're really into it, and then sometimes life changes happen. Sometimes they for whatever reason they don't pursue it. What was sort of the spark for you after learning all that? You clearly you were obsessed with it, I would imagine, based on what it sounds like, right? But what was the
Mhm.
next step, I guess, once you finish school and now you have this whole world of people who are trying to make music? How do you get yourself out there?
Yeah, so well, I will start like I was gigging before I started university, not as a
Oh,
trumpet
cool.
player
Okay,
though. Ron Paley took me under his wing, and
cool.
another person who's just been so instrumental in my establishing a career and getting the confidence to actually do this.
You've had a lot of
Um,
like really successful, well-known mentors here, eh? It's like you're just meeting the right people at the right times.
Yeah, well, because I had listened to all these Frank Sinatra songs, and my dad was put it on one day, and I started singing along to all these tunes, and he's like, "I've never even heard you listen to this. How do you know these?" Like, so he
Yeah,
contacted Ron and said, "My daughter really likes this music, and like, would you consider getting together with her?" So Ron's like, "Bring her down." So
cool.
went over to Ron's place, and he knew that I had listened to a lot of Sinatra. So for intros for everything, he would like shrink down the big band charts into piano part, and then just look at me, and he wouldn't tell me what tune
Yeah,
it was that he was playing, and I'd start singing, and he just kind of, okay, well that's a one-off. So he'll do another one, and then I think we probably played for like an hour, and he's like, "How do you know all these songs?"
yeah,
And from that connection, I mean, I played at the Lyric Theater. I used to play with him at the Palm Lounge a lot.
cool.
I've hired him for my own gigs. Um, and he really gave me the opportunities and the confidence, and introduced me to a lot of people that helped me grow my career.
Well, maybe a
But
better way to word that question I had then is, in light of all this, like, what was the what did you have to do to make yourself as your own music? I mean, it's a little different playing with someone else, especially someone established like that, than it is to being like, this is me, this is my sound, I'm leading this project, right? What was that
Mhm.
like to sort of become the focal point?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. I might have to think about this for a second. Yeah, it's definitely a change, like being a band leader.
Yeah,
Um, I love, and you were saying before, like jazz is such a big umbrella term, but I love the swing music and the standards. I love Latin music.
yeah,
I'm more drawn to, I guess, the more traditional jazz, though I do play modern stuff as well. I love like the Miles Davis and modal stuff. Um, there's a lot. So for me as a band leader, I just try to showcase all of that. So I want to keep the audience interested. And if somebody really likes those Sinatra tunes, they're not a big fan of the modal tunes,
yeah,
at least there's something for everybody in there. So that's something as a band leader, whenever I'm going in, I always, unless otherwise specified, if they're just like play for us,
yeah.
I want to make sure that we have, Latin tunes and, all different styles so that there can be something that everybody enjoys and it never gets stagnant or stale.
Right. And I guess you don't seem like a nostalgia act necessarily there as well, right? Because I guess there's a danger of, if you're just doing the Sinatra stuff, people will be like, "Oh, this is the band that plays
Mhm.
oldies," right? You don't want to be that.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a good, and it keeps the musicians on their toes too, because like my husband's a bass player. He
Cool.
doesn't want to be playing Latin bass lines all night. He wants
Yeah.
to be able to walk. He wants to be able to solo. He wants to be able to do things. So keeping the music changing constantly. Um, stops you from getting bored with the gig, especially if it's like a 3-hour gig, right?
Sure.
It's harder to do like just all standards one night or something like that. You want to change it up a bit. So
Well, I think that's a problem that maybe a lot of bands playing other styles of music aren't faced with. The idea of it's a 3-hour gig, because I mean, you know, if you're a punk band, you're playing for half an hour, maybe, right? I mean,
yeah.
if you know, most different styles, there's kind of a one set thing, unless it's a very special event. But I mean, I imagine as a jazz band, you're often playing multiple sets just based on the nature of the type of music you play and sort of the typical settings that's played in.
Well, jazz was a social music. It was
Sure.
created as social music, right? So it was music that people were dancing to, that was playing at parties.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily the thing that we do now where we go and sit very politely and listen to jazz and applaud after people were up dancing. It was supposed to get you moving.
Yeah.
Um, it was supposed to be like this social music. So now it's still kind of like that background music. So people know you're there, but they don't really know you're there, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and especially if you're doing like a wedding or something, they might ask you to do, the cocktail hour and then play during dinner or something like that. So you have to break it up. Or you play the Palm Lounge and it's like 8 till midnight or whatever.
Right. Right.
Do 3 sets.
Do you have like a different mindset going into a show like that, where you know you're going to be basically seen as background music, whereas kind of as opposed to something where you know the listeners are going to be more interested specifically in what you're doing, and they're there to see you, or they're there to see jazz in general? Like, I imagine the getting ready for a show like that's got to be a bit of a different setup, and just in terms of like personally being prepared to, because it obviously doesn't suck if people are at the wedding and they're not there for you, but it's a different thing, right? You're not the focal point at all. You're just
Mhm.
sort of in the background and doing something pleasant, I guess, rather than sort of saying, this is my art, this is what I am showing you.
Right. Yeah, definitely there's that difference. And yeah, it's just you kind of especially if I'm doing like a wedding or something, I'm probably going to do more standards. I'm going to
Of
do
course,
more,
yeah.
stuff that the audience is also familiar with. I'm not going to try some experimental free jazz, for a wedding. So for when it's situations like that, I want something to be, um, I don't want it to be intrusive, because that's supposed to be, people are supposed to be able to converse. They're supposed to be
Yeah.
able to socialize. You don't want the sound of the music overpowering all of that where they're just yelling at each other. It's like, it's like being at a bar at
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that point. So keeping things kind of nice and light, and not doing anything really loud or things like that. But that's the great thing about improvising, is that you can do something interesting with your bandmates. You can still make it interesting for yourselves.
Sure.
People they're like, oh, I'm listening to music. They don't really notice. And you can still do things yourselves to make things interesting and keep it interesting, especially if you have a very long gig.
Yeah. Well, even within those standards, you can take those in a lot of directions that are still, you know, I guess calm enough it would fit a wedding, but yeah, that makes sense. Like, I can see that for sure. So how can people find your music? I mean, like I said, I found you sort of by accident, because I try to find as many local musicians as I can, and then I listen to them, and then I kind of reach out to the ones whose music I like. But what's the best way to hear your stuff? I mean, for someone who maybe is being introduced to you for the first time on the show, what's the best option to check out what you're doing?
Yeah, probably my website, CandiceTugbyMusic.com. I have like all my YouTube videos and my SoundCloud feed and everything's kind of linked in there. So
Cool.
that's kind of your one-stop shop, I guess. I'm also on Facebook. You just look up Candice Tugby, and Instagram.
Cool.
And yeah.
Do you have any plans? Obviously, by the time we're recording this, we're still in a pandemic. Shows are starting to happen for all styles of music. They're slowly getting to be back to somewhat normal again. Do you have any idea of what this is going to look like for you, kind of re-emerging from the pandemic?
And I don't know. Like I did personally, I don't do a ton of like public gigs anymore.
Right, right.
I'll play at a restaurant here or there, but I do a lot of private gigs. And those are nice because they're repeats, especially if it's like we
Sure.
do this banquet every year, then you're guaranteed you're going to get the gig for the banquet. So all those things have kind of disappeared. So until, like, for me especially, until those things are starting to happen again, that's going to be when I start, getting back to some sense of normal.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's been rough. I did a virtual duet last summer with Benny Benack III, a trumpet player and pianist and singer as well,
Oh, cool,
from
cool.
New York City. And we did this long distance virtual duet. So I've been trying to do more things like that, and taking lessons, because right now there's some fantastic musicians who aren't on the road, and they're
Definitely,
like,
yeah.
I'll teach, and I'm like, when am I going to get a chance to study with you ever? Like,
Right.
this is insane. So I'm trying to take advantage of those opportunities. I know that sounds bad, I'm taking advantage of their misfortune, but
you're right though. I mean, I think that this time of everyone being locked down has actually opened up a bunch of things that, it's not ideal, but ways to create or to learn, like you said, that wouldn't have been possible in any other situation. So I guess like it's nice to see people are making the most of it. And I think that once shows kind of fully come back and people start recording again, as much as they used to and things like that, I think we're going to be inundated by all this creative stuff, whether it's music or art or film or anything else, because everyone's been bottled up and has no real way of letting any of that out, right? So I think it's going to be just like an avalanche of content, which is great. I mean, for music fans, right?
Oh, exactly. And I've also been working in the film industry the past couple months as a music consultant for one of the CBC miniseries that's coming out in February. So
yeah, I saw that on your bio. How did you get that?
Actually, Derek.
Oh, nice.
I mean, man, he looks out for me, I'll tell you. But yeah, they asked him if he could do it, and he was going away, and he's like, well, I got the person for you. And they called me up, like, he's like, my manager's going to call you in 5 minutes. I'm like, yeah, sure, 5 minutes. Literally 5 minutes later, she calls me. I was like, yeah, I could do this. She's like, okay, I'm going to have, I'll have them call you in a couple hours. So I'm like, okay. A couple hours later, like, they just moved really fast.
That's
and
cool.
It's been a very interesting experience. I've never worked in the film industry before, and getting to go on set, and it's like all the movie magic.
Yeah.
I'm mesmerized now. I'm sure people who do it for 5-10 years are probably just bored out of their mind, but I find it all very fascinating. And I'm working with the actor to get him to like look legit on screen, and
cool. Okay.
helping with the edits and making sure that things look as good as they can. They're really putting a lot of work into it, and I appreciate that, because there's so many films I've seen, especially as a trumpet player, where I'm just like, oh no.
You see that even with guitar and stuff sometimes too. You're like, there's some guy's doing a solo and you can tell he's not even anywhere near the right part of the instrument, for sure. So that's cool. They're doing that amount of detail.
Mm-hmm.
When is that show already airing, or is that something that's coming out in future?
It'll be coming out in February. It's called The Porter.
Okay.
And it's about the African Americans who came up to kind of flee, not slavery, but just the tension that was down there. So they came up to Canada in search of a better life. And I mean, to be honest, it was better, but not really.
Yeah.
They were basically only allowed to work as like streetcar porters, which is why it's called The Porter, or
right.
The woman worked as maids. And a lot of them actually came up here to do schoolwork. They were getting law degrees and doctorates, and they had to work as, basically a servant on the train. They weren't allowed to work in a law office or something in summer vacations. So it's kind of covering their stories and talking about the triumphs and trials and tribulations. Yeah. And it's very well done. And I think it's going to be a very good showing. And I think it's going to be something that a lot of Canadians particularly aren't familiar with, or very aware of.
For sure. So, we tend to think of that as being an American thing, right? I mean, I mean, we have our own, obviously, issues with racism. Canada has quite unfortunately, but yeah, I think that particular era and is often thought of as an American issue. So it's very, very timely, I think, with what's going on in the culture too, to have a show like that.
Yeah, I believe it's coming out for Black History Month as well, and it's going to be airing on BET as well in the States. So.
Oh, cool! So they get to see some Canadian stuff too.
Yes.
Right on. Cool.